Welcome back. Welcome back. It is episode 4 of Third and Manageable, the weekly podcast for Georgia and Atlanta sports enthusiasts. I am your party host, Walker. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. It is a Sea&Sky production. We got a lot of stuff we're working on, very excited about. So subscribe to that YouTube channel. Let somebody know. You better tell somebody. We're going to talk a lot about UGA basketball in this episode because there is a massive, massive game tonight. You may have heard against the South Carolina Gamecocks. We're also going to hit Georgia baseball and softball, gymnastics, and even some rasslin at the end of the show. We haven't talked enough about rasslin, and rasslin's back in a big way if you saw what happened over the weekend. But first, Georgia basketball. Coming off the biggest week of the season, coming off the biggest week for Georgia basketball in 10 years. That's right. I just noticed I'm wearing my Tribe Called Quest t-shirt today. So when I say, can we kick it? The answer is yes, we can. And Georgia basketball doing some big things right now. That win over Florida was absolutely huge. Blue Cane just buried the lousy, stinking, nasty, ugly, disgusting Gators with a clutch three, a cold-blooded three, if you will, late in that game. And when you play these big, meaningful games in March, and it's been a long time, it's been since the SEC tournament a little over 10 years ago when J.J. Frazier cooked the chickens last. It's been that long since I can remember Georgia basketball playing these kind of meaningful games in March. And when you play them and you win them, it just sets up an even bigger game next time. I was thinking about this morning, and I went back to the last football season. And Georgia lost a game early in the season against Alabama, which set up kind of this like must-win scenario in Austin, Texas against the Longhorns. And you win that game. But then you dropped another one against Ole Miss. So late in the season, you had a huge must-win game at home against Tennessee. And Georgia won. And what did that do for you? It set up another huge must-win game at home against Georgia Tech over Thanksgiving. And the Dogs were able to beat Tech. And then it set up another huge, not must-win, but really, really want-to-win game against Texas in the SEC championship game, which led to the biggest must win of them all, which unfortunately Georgia did not get, but the college football playoff and the Sugar Bowl. So think about it in those terms when you think about basketball, because that game against Florida, it was an absolute must win if Georgia wanted to have any realistic chance of making the NCAA tournament, which some of us had kind of given up on. But that was a game you had to have, and they got it. So now you got to have that game against Texas to capitalize. Georgia gets that win on the road in Austin. I think played their best game of the year against the Longhorns. And now what do you have? Another massive must-win game against South Carolina. If you tune into this after the game, which is being played in about 5 hours as I'm recording this, we will have a full reset recap later in the week. So what is this game against South Carolina tonight? Well, if you look at the standings, you say, well, Walker, South Carolina is the worst team in the conference. Georgia's already beaten South Carolina once this year. Easy win, right? There is no such thing as an easy win in the SEC in basketball this season. It's just not set up that way. South Carolina has beaten a couple of bubble teams already. They have played very, very close games against teams like Auburn and Florida, as have the Dogs. But they are certainly not any kind of pushover on their home floor. And they got a couple of bigs that are really, really good. Georgia's front court is going to have to show up in a big way. Surreal, who had a good game last time against South Carolina, if I'm remembering that correctly, and Godfrey, you're going to have to be the enforcers. Asa Newell is going to have a game, and you're going to have to open up the offense inside out, as basketball people like to say. Open it up for those guards who are playing so well right now. Silas Demery's averaging 20 points a game lately. Blue Cane is just doing everything on the floor when he's on the floor. And that is how Georgia's going to win this game. They're going to have to dictate the pace a little bit, speed things up. South Carolina really wants to slow you down. So what kind of implications do you have for the NCAA tournament now that we're absolutely having this conversation? Joe Lunardi, and I've been warned not to only listen to Joe Lunardi when it comes to bracketology. There are a lot of bracketologists out there. I don't know how you become a bracketologist, what kind of degree you have to get to be in that field, but everybody has this consensus right now that Georgia's in the field. But obviously that can change with one loss because you're hanging on. You are in the last 4 byes currently, as I sit here right now, according to Joe Lunardi. And what that means is you don't have to play the play-in game in Dayton, Ohio. You are in the field of 64. But again, lose one game and that can all change. Consensus again is that Georgia needs 1 win this week. You got 2 games, you got SCAR on the road, and then you have Vanderbilt at home. So you're like, well, you know what, Walker, if we lose to South Carolina, we can still beat Vanderbilt on Saturday at Stegman Coliseum, which is true, and get the win that you need to get yourself into the tournament. But I don't want it to come down to that last game of the season. I do not like that idea at all, especially since Vanderbilt is a very, very good team. They are solidly in the tournament already, and they're a lot better than South Carolina. Let's put it that way. So don't want that kind of pressure cooker at Stegman Coliseum on Saturday when you play Vanderbilt. If you could go ahead and, I'm going to say this in air quotes, wrap up your tournament bid against South Carolina tonight, that would be ideal. Now, the reason I say that with the air quotes is there's no guarantee. Again, consensus from the bracketologist says if Georgia wins 1 game this week, they're in. But you never know what kind of bid stealers are going to be out there once you get into these conference tournaments. And by bid stealers, I mean mid-major teams that are not expected to win their conference tournament. And they go on a run and they sneak into the tournament, and maybe a smaller conference now gets 2 teams in instead of 1, which knocks one of the bubble teams off of their line. And you never know. There's always bid stealers. You just don't know how many of them there are going to be. So 2 wins this week would be incredibly fantastic. Absolutely ideal. That would lock Georgia in, I'm pretty sure. 1 win, probably going to get Georgia in. And I'd rather have it on the road against SCAR than have to have it on Saturday against Vandy. Now, I expect the Vanderbilt game on Saturday to be fantastic. I think that Georgia fans are locked in right now, dialed in. All of the UGA shows that I listen to that spend most of the time talking about football, because football's king. We've said that before. But all of these shows are locked in right now and talking basketball. And for Mike White, a few weeks ago, we had some negative comments about him. A lot of people did. There were a lot of emotional tweets being sent about maybe sending Mike White packing, which clearly was an overreaction. And right now you look back on it and say, oh, that was a big overreaction. Georgia fans got to be patient with this. The SEC this year is as difficult of a conference as I've ever seen in a college basketball season. And right now, Georgia's playing their best ball at the end of the year. Mike White, National Coach of the Week. Congratulations. So I hope that my comments were not too harsh. I don't think they were. I think it was just a slow down, let's see how this plays out kind of thing. And the corrections have been made. A lot of people rolled their eyes when they saw we've implemented a halftime at practice because Georgia's second half was going so poorly in seemingly every game, and they were getting run out of the gym just starting the second half seemingly time and time again. So he made that adjustment about we're going to rework and reimagine what halftime is. Seems to have worked. Again, Silas Demery playing his best ball of the year. Only good things right now for Georgia basketball, including the Lady Dogs, who got a massive win. Can't miss that in Knoxville over the weekend, which is obviously not a place that many teams go and win basketball games. So everything happening on the hardwood right now is all good. Fingers crossed that it stays that way. And maybe we can talk a little bit more about seeding in a week or two. Wouldn't that be fun? The SEC tournament for the Lady Dogs is coming up. They have a game against Arkansas on Wednesday afternoon. And obviously at the end of this week, we will see where the men's team is going to be seated in the SEC tournament, which should be very, very good. Very, very exciting tournament this year. We'll transition there, get into baseball a little bit, and the 4-game sweep of Florida Gulf Coast, which sounds fantastic. It is fantastic, don't get me wrong. You can't do a whole lot better than 4-0 over the weekend. The manner in which Georgia baseball is winning right now is a bit concerning, as we have seen time and time again this team get behind 3-0, 4-0, 5-0, 6-0. And I know that everyone is looking at this and saying, ooh, is that a recipe for success down the road? And I caution again not to make too much out of this, not to worry about it too much, because the starting pitching has been in flux. You've had injuries, you've had illnesses, you got people on pitch counts, and the starting pitching that you're seeing right now is not what you're going to see in a few weeks. Georgia's got another weekend here to tune up against Columbia University, hopefully pick up some more wins before SEC play starts. Yeah, we're already there next weekend at beautiful Foley Field against Kentucky. So some things need to be worked out between now and then. But the good news, Georgia bats are firing on all cylinders. I mean, Georgia is just tearing the cover off the ball and scoring a lot of runs. And so those deficits that you have seen, those 5-6 run deficits, are being erased. And we had a few walk-off wins over the weekend against Florida Gulf Coast. It's a pretty good team, pretty good program. So that was all really exciting. I mean, if you were watching just as a baseball fan, those were some really exciting games. That one on Sunday, walk-off home run by Ryan Black, that was as loud as I have yelled at my TV in quite some time. So for Georgia baseball, you only have the one loss. You got to go way back to the first weekend of the season, UNC Wilmington, to find the only blemish on the schedule. The Georgia bullpen right now is pitching really, really well. They have all year. And again, hopefully just get that starting rotation set up a little better before you start SEC play. And that's where, the real season begins. So what do the Diamond Dogs have this week? You got a game against High Point. You have a game against Georgia State, the 2 midweek games at home, and then you got 3 at home against Columbia. Last non-conference weekend of the year. So now's the time to get some guys some at-bats, to get some guys some playing time, to get some guys out there on the mound and get yourself ready. There's no midweek game next week. It is all laser focused on the SEC and Kentucky. So for Slate and Ryan Black and Trey Phelps, just keep doing what you're doing. Just keep hitting the ball out of the park, and we're all going to be very happy. Again, Georgia, good candidate to go to Omaha, and so far nothing has changed my mind about that. Dogs are ranked as high as number 5, depending on what poll you're looking at. So despite a few hiccups, things are going swimmingly for Georgia baseball. Georgia softball had a good week. Not great, but a good week. Went 4-2 over the week. The 2 losses were the midweek game at Clemson, and then on Sunday, it just wasn't our day. We just got boat raced by Ohio State. But in between, the softball team picked up a couple wins against Stetson, UMBC, and a come-from-behind victory against Ohio State on Saturday. That was another really exciting game. That one just went back and forth, and the Dogs pull it out in the bottom of the 7th. I've been talking, when I've talked about the softball team so far this year, about the newcomers and the new faces. I have neglected to mention the players that have been around for a minute that are doing really, really good things and hitting the ball really, really well right now. Sarah Gordon is just dialed in. Jaden Goodwin is dialed in. Dallas Goodnight is getting on base and stealing a bunch of bases. So I did want to give them their flowers and not focus on the newcomers and the freshmen this week, but the players that are really making the engine run right now for Georgia softball. Lily Backus is pitching really well. And newcomer, transfer, Randy Rolling, called her Robbie a couple weeks ago. Sorry about that, but pitched a good game on Saturday as well. So Georgia softball is in good shape right now with just the 2 losses. That's it. Came into the week undefeated. So drop a couple of games. That's no huge deal. And they start conference play this weekend. It is already time. So no midweek game, but a huge series this weekend. At what the guys on 960 The Ref are calling New Jack City, over there at the Jack Turner Softball Stadium. And if you can get out and watch this team play, it's not only a good time, it's a great environment, but they could really use the sport. Starting SEC play against a good Tennessee team this weekend. And the goal, every time you play a conference series at home, is to win 2 out of 3. Let's see if the softball team can do that. Georgia Gymnastics is back. Man, what a big win against Kentucky. Slimmest of margins over the weekend. The coaching change seems to have been absolutely the right decision. They were pushing all the right buttons over there, the co-coaches now in Georgia Gymnastics, which of course was such a big powerhouse for most of the time that I was growing up and coming up and attending the University of Georgia. Seems to be back on track to be that again and having a good season so far. So congratulations really to everyone. Talked about a lot of Georgia sports so far. They're all playing well. Everything school. Yeah, Tennessee fans are ridiculous with that stuff. Oh, we're the everything school. University of Georgia athletics are in good hands and good shape right now. Spring football starts next week, so we're going to save that conversation for later in the week or maybe for next week as to what to expect from the Georgia football team in spring practice as we lead up to G-Day. I just did want to say real quick that I am so happy that Kirby and Josh Brooks and everyone involved decided to keep G-Day as a thing. A lot of teams around the country, I don't know how many, but I know Texas started this whole nonsense of canceling spring games. And a lot of coaches have expressed that they don't like the spring games. And I don't know really how much it does for your players who are already locked into a starting spot. But I know for players that are competing for playing time, spring practice and G-Day is such a big deal. And it's such a big deal for the fans because I've said this for years, and I've heard this echoed by some this week. Not everyone can afford to go to a Georgia football game. The tickets have gotten very expensive. And when you do go to a game, especially if it's a big conference game, if it's at night, you're going to deal with a lot of chaos, a lot of traffic. It's maybe sometimes not necessarily the best place for kids, as people have been imbibing all day long, which they should. But G-Day is just an opportunity to bring the family out, to bring young kids out and just enjoy a day at Sanford Stadium and watch a football game. And I can't think of anything in the world wrong with that. You always hope that there's no injuries at G-Day. That's just always the big concern. But outside of that, everything about that atmosphere, it's usually nice weather by mid-April. It's just a great day. And I have been to G-Day many times. And I hope that it is something that we continue to do. I hope that it is a tradition that we keep. It is definitely happening this year, as was announced last week by UGA Athletics. So kudos for keeping G-Day a thing. And we'll talk about spring practice next week. As far as the Atlanta Braves are concerned, not good news this week about Sean Murphy. After last season and all of the injuries that this Atlanta Braves team had to work through, the first thing that you have to deal with is a big injury in spring training as catcher Sean Murphy gets plunked in the ribs and is now going to miss, they say, 4 to 6 weeks. And I got texts immediately. Oh, here we go again. Oh, man, this team, here we go. Cancel the season. It's over. And again, relax. Aaron Rodgers said it. Frankie Goes to Hollywood said it a long time before him. Relax. Sean Murphy should be back in mid-April. And not to say it's not a big blow that he's going to miss time. Definitely need his bat in the lineup. And I think that he was set up and probably is still set up for a nice bounce back year. But in the meantime, Drake Baldwin is a guy that Atlanta Braves people are really high on. And one of the top prospects that we have, if not the top prospect that we have. So it is going to be actually really good to get him in the mix, see what he can do as we move forward during spring training. See if he ends up making the team out of spring training. I've heard people say that they're skeptical that that's going to happen, but you never know. You perform really, really well and see what happens. Of course, Tromp is there as well to fill some time. And who knows, the Braves could end up making a move before spring training ends. They may have made one already as I've been sitting here, but I don't think it is necessarily a death sentence for the Braves season. Spring training is going pretty well. I watched a good bit of the game on Saturday and a little bit of the game on Monday. And I will say this, I loved the pitching. Lopez and Schwellenbach both looked really good. Those were two names that we've circled on every episode of the podcast here and said, boy, really need them to come out and perform in a big way. Maybe even step up from what they did last season, level up even a little bit. But certainly both of those guys had a good year last year, and looks like they are just right back to form from what I saw over the weekend. Also saw Matt Olson and Austin Riley hitting home runs, which is a great, great sign. The Braves are going to have to muddle through a little bit. You start the season with a very, very tough road trip at San Diego and at Los Angeles. The Dodgers spent $800 gazillion on their team this year, and I think they're expected to win all 162 regular season games. So going to Dodger Stadium the first week of the season is going to be tough, especially now without Sean Murphy, without Ronald Acuna Jr., without Spencer Strider. But all those guys are coming back soon. This is not last year. This is not a extended several months on the disabled list or out for the season kind of thing. All those guys are coming back soon, and the Braves are going to have a very, very good lineup, and looks like are going to have a very, very good starting rotation as well, just from what I saw over the weekend. I know it's only spring training. We'll see what occurs later in the month when things get started for real, but still, the hopes are high for this team. And it's a wait-and-see game. You got to see how these guys respond when they come back from these injuries. You got to see how these prospects and guys that are going to play some from the bench are going to pan out. But I'm very excited, still very, very high on this Atlanta Braves team this year. Don't let this Sean Murphy injury send you in the wrong direction as far as your outlook on this season. Don't be a wet blanket. The Braves are going to be fine. Your Atlanta Hawks had a very, very nice win against the Memphis Grizzlies and continue to be kind of a mid team right now in the Eastern Conference. But every now and then they show you flashes. And boy, Dyson Daniels, the pickup of the decade for the Atlanta Hawks, got him in that trade in the offseason. And he has just been nothing but excellent all year long. In the new guys here, I mean, Karis LeVert had that game winner the other night, and some of these guys are really contributing big minutes and scored a lot of points. It's not that what you're seeing from the Hawks is terrible. They competed well against Oklahoma City a few nights ago. I watched most of the second half there. And OKC is just a much better team than Atlanta right now. But the Hawks, got in there. They hustled. They played well. They competed. And at the end, they just couldn't get over the hump because they were playing from behind all night. But they're not a bad team. And again, we're looking at next year. We're looking at Jalen coming back. And there's some good young pieces there with Okongwu. And, of course, Risa Shea, who has been playing pretty well. The Frenchman, been playing pretty well recently. So we're going to continue to keep an eye on the Hawks, but not putting a whole lot into that right now. Won't spend a whole lot of time there. I do want to mention Atlanta United real quick. Had that great opening weekend win, but had a rough match at Charlotte on Saturday. Hopefully that was a little bit of an outlier because weren't a whole lot of good things happening right there. And I am expecting good things from the Five Stripes this season. So bounce back game coming up this weekend in Atlanta. We'll see how that goes. And big shout out to John Cena with the heel turn this weekend. I said we were going to throw a little wrestling in there. And listen, what The Rock has done with his final boss character and just being like the ultimate bad guy, and now bringing John Cena in as the heel, and taking down the All-American kid there in Cody Rhodes, the American Nightmare. It's brought back a lot of great nostalgia for people like me who grew up watching wrestling and watched all through the Attitude Era and the Monday Night Wars. And I even go back to the old Jim Crockett promotions back in the 80s and 90s. And I love wrestling. And it just got to a point where it just wasn't watchable for me for a long time. But what they've done in the storytelling here, and I loved when The Rock the other night put the two fingers up when John Cena made the very, very unexpected heel turn, which signals that maybe there's a third man, just like the old NWO storyline from back in the day when Hollywood Hogan had the shocking heel turn. And everything they're doing right now is very calculated. They're telling the story in such a slow, deliberate way, which is how it used to be done back in the old days. And I just love it. And I'm excited to see what they do next. And I haven't been excited about watching wrestling in a long time. So kudos to whoever is in charge of booking right now. I guess it's Hunter Hearst Helmsley. I don't know who's in charge there in the WWE at this point, but this has been a whole lot of fun to watch. So we'll leave it there. We'll get back next week, or actually I'm going to get back later this week and really recap where Georgia basketball is, because either Georgia's going to be looking at a solid chance to get in the NCAA tournament, or they're going to be facing a must-win game. So either way, we need to talk about that, and we will later on in the week. Go Dogs! Beat the Chickens! Oh, oh, oh! Sea&Sky Productions, that is the YouTube channel. Thank you for following. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for watching. Much appreciated. I'm Walker here in the palatial studios in Western North Carolina. Have a great week, and go Dogs.